I'm Dr. Jordan Vollrath. Today we're going to be talking about Cherry Health and how a health technology comes to be. Where do they actually come from? So my background, I'm a practicing family physician and an entrepreneur. Previously, before getting into my role with Cherry Health, I was working with TELUS, their virtual care platform. For a brief period of time before leaving to do Cherry, I was the provincial lead for the TELUS virtual platform here in Alberta. I'm the medical director for the Aesthetic Room YYC, and I have a specialty practice right now in family medicine, where I'm doing mental health and obesity care at the Alberta Obesity Center. And then, of course, Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Cherry Health. Growing a health tech startup is really difficult. So building a marketplace type business is really, really difficult. You have the cold start problem. You don't have a product or service to sell. It's not like a one-to-one. You need to create a functional network before it has any value, right? So what's the value of a network when there's nobody on it yet? Imagine joining Facebook and you're the first person there and none of your friends are on it, right? It's not going to be very useful. So how do you actually get past that? How do you actually seed a network? How do you get people on there and actually be providing value? So we're going to talk a little bit about the people, the supports, the journey along the way, and how we actually came to be a company. So as you'll see shortly, it truly does take a village to raise a child. So we'll get into how many different people, investors, and community supports have played a role in our success. So what is Cherry Health? It's kind of like LinkedIn, but for doctors and healthcare professionals in general. So most countries have a widely adopted medical network used by their healthcare practitioners. So what do I mean by that? This is the digital infrastructure empowering healthcare providers to deliver care. This is actually what's going on behind the scenes. So to give you some examples, the United Kingdom, they've got doctors.net.uk. Asia has M3. The US has Doximity. India, they've got Daily Rounds, right? And so these are all big, thriving networks. They've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of healthcare practitioners using it. And so it's not like a pie in the sky fantasy. This is like something that Canada is sorely lacking and really behind the times on. So what does Canada have? Facebook. This is unfortunately the state of the union right now. This is the backbone for our healthcare system across the country. If you need to figure out who to refer something to, if you have a patient care problem you're trying to figure out, if you're trying to sort jobs and organize temporary coverage, all these different pieces, this is how we do it. It's done on Facebook currently. And so that's what we're replacing. We're actually building that infrastructure for the Canadian healthcare system. So how do you get started? Where is the actual inception of the health tech company come from? So back in the day, 2013, Dr. Ray Musica gave a talk at my grad. So he's a family physician and a famous entrepreneur. So he was in the video game space. He actually worked at BioWare and was the executive director for EA, so gigantic video game company. And so he gave a talk at our grad when we were actually finishing up medical school. And this is where the idea was first planted in my mind that physicians can actually run tech businesses. This is how it started. So how did we actually get going? I graduated in 2019. I finished my residency here in Calgary, and I started working as a locum doctor, which is just Latin for substitute physician. So I was doing temporary coverage all over the place, all around Southern Alberta. And it was a pain in the butt to actually arrange sequential coverage, right? So there's a physician shortage. There's a ton of jobs everywhere. Why was it difficult to actually line up high quality sequential work? And this is really where the inspiration for creating Cherry Health came from. That was that problem recognition, just being the boots on the ground and experiencing the frustration and the problem. So fortunate series of events. I met my co-founder, Max Kurz, in early 2020. He has a background in actually building companies. He's previously built and exited his own health tech startup. He worked at Harvest Ventures, which is a venture studio here in Calgary. And we linked up and we started brainstorming. We were thinking, okay, what could we actually do in the healthcare space? And we landed on this idea of building this physician network. Right from the get-go, the idea was to use this jobs and locum matching kind of as the seed or the first year to actually get people onto the network. That was how we were going to solve this problem of actually having initial value up front. And so how did we start doing it? Initially we had the idea, then we started talking to family and friends, people who'd be users of the product. So any of the doctors I knew, any of the clinics I knew, I would call them up, hey, if we built this, is this something you would use? Is this something you would pay a certain amount of money for? And it was pretty unanimous, like, yeah, this is sorely needed. I think why doesn't this exist already? So then we started working on a mock-up. So this was just like a flat plate design of what the platform would actually look like. And we kind of sat there and brainstormed, like, what would the specifications need to be? How would it need to flow? How do people actually interact with each other and the product? And then we went back and we did more of that research and that user testing, and showed them those flat plates and saw what they thought of the prototype. So again, we got some feedback, we iterated on it, and then again, we had really positive feedback. People were pretty hyped on the idea of having this network to connect physicians with jobs. So Max himself, he actually has a PhD in machine learning and biostatistics. So he's a brilliant coder and programmer. So between the two of us, we had it pretty covered of like how to actually conceptualize what it should look like. And then he was able to bring it to reality, and we had a beta version. And that's how we actually got the initial app out there. So that was early May 2020. We started actually working on that. And then the launch. Yeah, there we go. How do you actually launch it? Like, okay, now you have a prototype. Now what? So we had a lot of help on this as well. So my primary care network, the Calgary West Central Network, they actually thought it was a pretty cool idea. We chatted with them, and they were really helpful in actually getting us into the hands of doctors and clinics in that regional pocket in Calgary. And that actually proved to be really critical, because building this two-sided marketplace with these hyper-regional network effects requiring to actually make it work. So having this support from a local entity, a healthcare network, was really, really helpful in actually getting both sides of that marketplace on there and working. And then we got lucky on this one too. One of the clinics I worked at, the clinic manager there was Jen McDougall. Just so happened to be the president of the Clinic Managers Association of Canada. So that was like a really critical partnership that came initially. So that was fantastic. She really helped us get that out there into more clinics and get some more user testing and some feedback. We did a lot of posting on Facebook too. That was like a really good early pathway to getting it out there. Was, hey, we're building this thing. What does everybody think? Give it a shot. Again, more positive early traction. So we opened it up from just Calgary to Edmonton, and then shortly after it kept going. So we opened it up to Alberta in general a few months later. Okay, so it's starting to grow. Now what? This seems like a potential winner. I myself obviously don't have a whole lot of background in business, trained as a physician and doing healthcare. It was kind of daunting. Like, what do you do now? So we started linking up with some mentor programs. So Ray Musica, Dr. Musica, who I was talking about earlier, the innovator, he actually founded a program called Venture Monitoring Services through the University of Alberta. And so it was kind of like a Shark Tank pitch, except instead of money, you're getting help, people's time. And so we put together a deck, and we actually landed a stellar group of people. So how it works, you pitch, and then if you get 3 people to join your team and say, okay, I want to be an advisor for these guys, then you have a team, and now you're officially in the program. And so it was fantastic. We had Todd Carson leading it. He's an entrepreneur and consultant himself. Tim Lin in the finance space, Cheryl Watson with experience growing large companies, and then Heather Barnhouse was a corporate lawyer, and then John Rogers, who had a lot of experience in the Alberta health system and just as a general consultant and coach. So, this really got us going. They provide a ton of value, a ton of resources and direction to actually, what do you actually do? How do you start growing a company? So we figured we'd need some money. That was the next problem we had to tackle. So where do you get money from? That's a good question. We'll chat about that in a second, but how do you even get the money in the first place? Like, what do you do? We looked into it. We got hooked up with Innovate Calgary and the platform program. And so we went through the boot camp. So this was like, how do you create a pitch deck? What even goes into a pitch deck? How do you convey the problem and the solution and the business case to the point that it's convincing enough and to attract investors? How do you do so in a way that's short and concise, but also that has like the depth and the traction displayed? So kind of that delicate balance of not too much and just enough information. And so, David Yiptong, Jane DeRoche, Adam Craig, they were incredibly helpful learning and helping us grow and actually, start to become better at creating business presentations. And then so we met a lot of fantastic companies while we were there as well. They set it up kind of like a peer mentorship group. Many of these companies are thriving today. We made a lot of friends, and it was great to actually like learn from each other and kind of practice in that collegial environment. So now we had the pitch deck. we had to start taking it out there. So we applied for some grant funding through the Canadian Medical Association. So this was through the Jewel program. And we actually wound up in the early 2021, it would have been January. We won the first prize for Physician Innovation Award across all of Canada. So we had $100,000 now, and that's really like what got us going. That was the first thing that enabled Max to become a full-time founder. He took the plunge, he quit his job, and we started doing it the whole time. I was doing it still part-time. So I think at this time I was working 2.5 days as a physician. And then the rest of my week, I was working just on Cherry and of course, evenings and weekends. But that's how we actually got going. That was the initial funding that gave us our kickstart. So then, okay, we've got a product, it's developing, it's getting better. Now we need to actually like grow it and get it out there. It was still a bit clunky. It was full of bugs. It was like not super user friendly, but it was something. We had market signal. There was a lot of early adopters using it, and we actually had connections going. There were physicians picking up jobs, and there were communities happy with what they were getting. So we figured it was time to properly raise some money. So we took our pitch deck skills and we hit the road. So we wound up raising $1.23 million at a $4.3 million valuation, and that was with a convertible debenture structure. So it was a tough challenge, like raising that much money. This was no easy feat. The amount of pitches you had to do, the amount of people you had to talk to in outreach, the amount of like conflicting feedback you'd get back and forth. But we wound up oversubscribing our $1 million target, and we did so at a valuation higher than we initially thought. You know, there was a lot of doubt going around, and we wound up coming through. So it was a really big learning adventure, but we pulled it off. So Startup TNT, local organization here in Alberta, they gave us our first check. That was the actual first dilutive funding that we took in. So that was through a pitch contest they host. Again, it's kind of like a Shark Tank event, except this time it's based on teams voting for you. And so that wound up getting us our initial money. And then we leveraged that and the momentum there to start picking up some institutional investors. Well Health Ventures out of BC came on, MTech Ventures or MTech Innovations here in Calgary, and then Broad Street Bulls. And then we picked up a bunch of angel investors too, you know, family and friends. So we started there. We had about 9 different physicians on the cap table actually taking that plunge. You know, they figured this is a product we want to exist. So let's put our capital and try and, you know, use this to make it come to fruition. So thank you to Dr. Gibson and Dr. Vandermeer, you know, 2 of our biggest angel investors on the whole project. So, okay, you got some funding there. How do you leverage that? How do you keep going? You know, grant funding wound up being the next thing. So Alberta Innovates has been a huge support for us. Their digital traction program, that actually enabled us to start generating our first revenue. So the program there, the idea is that you're able to de-risk your product and start building things that you think are going to facilitate making money. So we use that money to actually build a few different revenue generating mechanisms on the network. So that let us have the boost jobs on there, where now your job could float up to the top of the pile. And then the other piece where there could be active outreach. So if you didn't want to passively wait, the post and pray method, you could actually start searching the network and then sending messages to physicians, which has been a hit so far as well. Digital Health Circle, now called Circle Innovation, you know, they supported us with marketing grants. MyTax, they helped hook us up with Nadia Lockman, who was our star intern. She had 2 master's degrees and she was doing her MBA at the time. She was incredible. Technology Alberta, you know, now we're using them to get marketing internship support. So there's lots and lots of community funding and supports out there, and that's been instrumental in, you know, growing and making the most of that investor and that dilutive funding. So how do you actually grow a company? Like, where do you get your users? How do you actually do it? So it's a very difficult challenge, right? So advertising in medicine to doctors is incredibly expensive. Pharmaceutical companies buy up all the ad space everywhere that there is the venue to advertise. And so the average company can't afford to actually just go and start buying ads. So it's very difficult. Physicians are scattered. They don't congregate very often. When they do, it's a conference, which is, again, incredibly expensive. And then the other thing that was really kind of making it tough was our users would churn happily. So we would get doctors on the platform, and then they would take a job and they wouldn't come back for 6 months. And so I was like, okay, we've done our job here, but like, how are we going to build a business off of it? It was very difficult to actually get to the size where you have this critical mass of people active and on the network. So, you know, we had a pretty big, you know, our work was cut out for us. And we had to get creative. So you name it, we've tried it. The idea was to just do as many channel tests as possible, see what works, and then kind of spread it everywhere and see what was actually the best, and then scale up and do those things. So social media wound up being one of our biggest drivers. Facebook groups, we kept posting on those. We sent out LinkedIn messages to, just across the entire country, whatever region we were targeting, we'd find doctors and outreach to them. We did content marketing, so medical news and journals, and we tried writing our own articles, all kinds of stuff. The group integration, this was actually one of the coolest projects. So across Canada, there's a few different doctor jobs groups for family physicians, and these are like the biggest kind of clusters and pockets of physicians connecting for work in the entire country. Like, this is probably where most doctor jobs are actually getting filled right now. And so we struck a partnership with them and Dr. Cody Jackson, and he allowed us to actually partner with him and build a Facebook group bot. So any job that actually got posted on the Cherry platform automatically now gets cross-posted over to these groups into the appropriate province. And so that's been a huge driver. It was a win-win. It grows the groups, it provides value to everyone that's actually in there, and at the same time it provides that brand recognition and that value. So any job, now there's a post with an image that links back to us, so that's been huge for getting in front of doctors. We tried magazine ads, the CMA, all these different pieces. We tried the digital version of the magazine ads. We've tried the pay-per-click marketing. We did Google, we did Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. I think we had Reddit ads going even at one point. We ran e-fax campaigns because, of course, healthcare still relies on the fax machine. So we'd send out tens of thousands of faxes every month. Email marketing, we'd send out tons and tons of emails to anybody that was interested in physician jobs or in hiring physicians. We did a lot of talks and webinars. That was actually another really big one. So this enabled us to kind of leverage pre-existing medical networks. So in healthcare, in medicine, all the oversight, all the administrative bodies, it's very hands-off, arm's length. Like, we like the innovation, we like these things, but we can't be seen as directly supporting one for-profit company or venture over another. And so because we had the CMA grant, that kind of took us from the outside to the inside, and that gave us a bit of a foot in the door. And then hosting webinars, that seemed to be the ticket to actually providing value to their audience while also still generating awareness for the company. So we would do lots of talks on recruiting, how to actually find doctors, best practices, everywhere else that you could go of the 20 million different scattered, fragmented point solutions that you could post jobs on. So we would partner up with the divisions of practice in BC, the primary care networks here in Alberta, all the way out to the East Coast, where the different health regions would let us do webinars for their physicians there. We sent out flyers. We did actual physical mail outs. That was a fun one. That one really didn't work. We tried the partnerships, which actually was pretty good. So we had a medical supply company, shout out to Stat Healthcare out of Alberta here. They just liked what we were doing, and for free they threw in a Cherry Health flyer into every delivery of gauze and gloves and everything that went out to all the clinics for a couple months. So that was really cool. Grad sponsors, we would host the family medicine residents, we would sponsor their grad party. So that was actually a really successful campaign that we're still doing. We've done tons of conferences, the Family Medicine Forum, Canadian Women in Medicine, eHealth, PriMed. So there's tons of these different options for conferences. Again, they're very expensive, but that is one of the few times that physicians actually congregate. Partnerships. So again, just having other companies in the healthcare space actually kind of do some promo or some cross promotion actually wound up being a really good way to do it. So Halo Health, the Physician Angel Investment Network, they've been really good for helping promote us. Well Health, one of our main investors, they have their apps.health network, where the idea is it cross-pollinates users between their different products. So that's been great. Of course, the Medical Group Management Association of Canada, so that's that Clinic Managers Association, they're big fans of it because they experience the problem of trying to recruit and source doctors. And then they have all these different other divisions below the national group. They've got the OMGMA, which services Ontario. There's the Alberta chapter, the Edmonton chapter, the Calgary chapter, and so on. So that was fantastic. And then we also just grew through a lot of word of mouth. We'd pop up a thing in the platform or send out an email. Just, hey, if you're getting value out of this, please share with your friends. And then community supports along the way. So again, I was saying it really does take a village to raise a child. So the number of programs that we've gone through is crazy. I apologize for the messiness of the slides. This is why I was late, was I was almost done. Just barely got this together in the nick of time. But we went through Plug and Play. They were fantastic as an accelerator program. We went through the Alberta Innovates Growth X Revenue Accelerator. We learned so much about just clients and customers and how to approach them and like how to talk to them in a way that solves their problems and also is kind of a win-win. So that was fantastic. Creative Destruction Labs, we were in for one round before we got voted off the island, but that was a really, really good exercise in just learning about focus and narrowing things down. The Life Science Innovation Hub here in Calgary, they've been fantastic as well. Their expert advisor program really helped us out with a lot of our marketing stuff. So Jana Boyko was really critical in helping devise our marketing strategy and our brand identity early on. And then there are just so many other like different supports in the communities. These have been really, really helpful in actually getting the platform out there and actually, you know, how do you network? How do you connect as opposed to trying to individually market to physicians? How do you actually start leveraging connections and networking sort of from that top-down perspective? So that's been really, really helpful. And also just as a learning experience, you know, connecting with others in the space, in the innovation world. So there's been tons and tons of fruitful connections that have come out of just attending events, virtual and in person. And then next thing was bridge round. So we just closed another funding round last week. So another $400,000. So we're at now $1.623 million of total dilutive funding closed now. So this was mostly done through repeat investors. People, you know, liked what was going on. They thought it was a strong signal and wanted to reinvest. We had a few new ones come on, the Drive Group and then the Alberta Obesity Center. So they've been fantastic. We're super happy to have them on the table. But yeah, so that's the funding situation so far. Fast forward today, like what is Cherry Health at this point? We started out as this locum connection for temporary relief services for physicians in Calgary only, for family doctors exclusively. So now it's all doctors, it's all types of jobs, virtual care, long-term, short-term, individual shifts. It's all the provinces across the Canada. It's all the specialties, surgeons, internal medicine specialties, family medicine specialties. We have a team of 12 people. We've got 2 ways to actually access the platform. We've got our mobile app you see there, and then we have our web app where you can actually log in online from your computer. At this point, we've got 1,600 different employers across the country signed up and registered on the platform. We've got more than 4,000 actual active users on the platform, doctors signed up using it. And every month we facilitate over 13,000 job searches. Coming up next, we've been doing the groundwork right now for the last several weeks, laying the framework for an expansion. So previously, every time we'd expanded, you know, from Edmonton or from Calgary to Edmonton, from Edmonton to Alberta, from Alberta to Canada, from family doctors to specialists, from temp jobs to all jobs, every single time we thought to ourselves, like, why didn't we just do this sooner? So right now we're actually growing broadly. We're enabling access to the medical network for all regulated healthcare professions across the whole country. So dentists, dental assistants, dental hygienists, pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, chiropractors, nurses, you name it. We're opening up that whole platform. And the idea here is it's this secure space for physicians and other healthcare practitioners to connect. And then in terms of the jobs, it's very health specific. It's very niche. So if you're actually looking for work, it has all those specific filters, those categories, those things that healthcare practitioners are actually interested in. And so it's very, very directly relevant to what you are looking for, as opposed to trying to go search through a list of Facebook postings or try and find medical jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed, when really you're just trying to find a temporary job for a week next month. So we're continuing to grow the network and we're going big next month. So stay tuned for that. So let's stay in touch. How can we help you? How can you help us? So healthcare jobs and recruiting, it's 100% free. There is absolutely no cost to post jobs, to actually go on the platform, to recruit physicians, and next month to start recruiting other healthcare professionals of any type as well. If your clinic needs the psychologist, a dietitian, an MOA, LPN, you name it, you'll be able to go on there and post that for free versus paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in ad space or tens of thousands of dollars to hire a headhunter or a recruiter. How can you help us? Awareness. So the biggest things we're looking for is actually just getting out there. You know, we provide this free service. It's a free platform. It doesn't cost anything to get on there and get your clinics out there. So tell your friends. We add a ton of value every day. There's dozens and dozens of actual jobs getting responded to and messages getting sent across there. You can connect and send messages to other healthcare practitioners. You can actually like message and connect with the people that work at a clinic you're already interested in, get the inside scoop, ask what it's really like there. And then the other thing that would be really helpful is our platform is powered by ad revenue. That's one of the main drivers of actual cash coming in. And so if you have a friend, or if you yourself operate a company, a product, a service, a vendor, a technology, anything that makes physicians' lives easier, our treatments more effective, our patient care better, our administrative burden less, these value adding products and services, that's what we want to actually have on the network and feature to our big platform of users. So if that sounds like anybody definitely send them our way. We've got a ton of different engagement options to actually plug them in, and the doctors on our platform seem to love clicking on ads, is what the data shows. They really enjoy the select partners that we've put on there because it really does help make their clinic smoother.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. And at that point, like if anyone has questions, they can unmute or maybe ask in the chat.
Dr. Vollrath, I have a quick question. When you approach some of these medical organizations, like the Division of Family Practice in BC, with Cherry Health, how did you find like their openness regarding partnering? And did you find that it was kind of easy to get them on board, or were there any struggles? How was that experience?
Good question. So there had to be like a clear tit for tat. There had to be like a very obvious reason why they would kind of break that. I don't know if it's a code, but sort of that like status quo of like not engaging with for-profit entities very much. And so if you approach them with the, hey, can you shout us out or promo us? Most of the time that wound up being a no. We definitely had like a couple yeses there because people understood the value. But by and large, you needed some sort of hook or way in. And that's where those like webinars on recruiting really came into play. Like these PCNs and these divisions of practice, because they have these local regional networks of physicians and clinics, they would hear it all the time, like the downstream consequences of the physician shortage. And so they're constantly getting tapped on the shoulder by their clinics. Like, hey, do you know anyone who's locuming in the neighborhood right now? Do you know anybody who's thinking about moving or taking on a different job? So they kind of just by being in that position became a sort of hub to help with connecting doctors with clinics anyways. And so they were well aware of that problem. And when we offered a webinar or like, hey, here's how you can recruit doctors, and we made it really kind of, I don't know if I'd say agnostic, but we didn't just talk about Cherry. We were talking about all the different resources. Like, here's all the different Facebook groups you can go on. Here's every residency program that hosts jobs. Here's every different website you can actually post on, and kind of like rank them from like cheapest to most expensive. All the different websites you could engage with, all the different newsletters and email chains you could try and actually get onto to help with recruiting and finding doctors. And so by doing that, that actually got us a good foot in the door. And we had a lot of success with those those recruiting campaigns.
Okay, amazing. Sounds good. I actually have a follow-up question. Because you mentioned that you worked with Creative Destruction Labs. Did you find that that was a worthwhile use of your time kind of in your company's lifespan, or do you recommend going to similar sort of incubators for other aspiring startups?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. The different accelerator programs that we've tapped into have provided a ton of value and just like learning and connections. Creative Destruction Labs is kind of like you get voted off the island. They vote some of the companies off every week. And so we did a lot of work getting in and making it into the first week. And then we got the boot on the first vote out. But we still did actually learn a lot and made some interesting connections there. There was a doctor who was one of the executive directors in one of the primary care networks. And so there were some lasting connections and some learnings that came out of that, but it was fairly short-lived.
Sounds good.
Hi, Dr. Vollrath. Thank you for the great talk. I have a quick question just for you, kind of as you're growing the company and narrowing the scope and like really working on product market fit. Was there ever a time where you kind of were thinking, hey, things are going really well, let's try to do A, B, C, D, E, but held back and kind of focused on one specific thing and doing it well. And like, can you tell me kind of your thought process on like keeping a strong focus when doing a startup?
So you're hitting the nail on the head there. The focus is the key. Like initially, we're still learning this lesson, right? Like you're bright-eyed and think you can boil the ocean all at once. Like thinking back to when we first got started, looking at that first pitch deck and what it said on it, and like how many different things we were going to do, how many different like modules and widgets would be on the network, versus like the actual reality of like the time it takes to build things and actually launch them and iterate on them and get them to the point of being useful. So we've tapered back our expectations in terms of like the volume of projects that we can handle by a lot. Like initially we figured we'd have all kinds of different stuff on there within months. And this is one of the things you kind of learn over time. And so we're still working on like trying to keep a focus. There's always some other new shiny object causing you to pull in that way, or somebody has a great idea and you're like, ooh, okay, yeah, we should definitely do that. But you really got to like hammer down your product roadmap, because you only have so much dev resources, and then B, your actual go-to-market time, right? You only have so much time, so much marketing funding. And so you really, really have to focus. And that, yeah, I don't know. That was one of the biggest things that we've learned through this whole game.
Hi, Dr. Vollrath. So I was wondering, so when you have an idea of any business, including this, is there any fear about another company, a bigger company, just manufacturing it in-house and just outcompeting?
In this specific space, not really. I mean, again, the power of the network is the network in that size. So it really is a first mover advantage type of thing. It's not like a product where it can instantly be replaced by something that's better. It truly does get its value from growth and soak time and adoption. And so sure, somebody else could build a network. One of these international companies could come to Canada. But again, it's how do you actually get people to adopt it, right? And so those examples I gave earlier on the different networks, they came to light by solving the problem du jour, right? So doctors.net.uk, this was back in the late 90s, where having an email address was pretty spiffy and new. That was the problem that got them going. Daily rounds in India was patient case collaboration. That's how they actually got their initial traction. M3 in Japan, it was prescribing information, right? So doctors just didn't have a digital, like an up-to-date tool like we use nowadays. And so they had this free platform with drug information on it. And that's how everybody got onto that platform. And so what is the problem du jour currently? What is the biggest threat facing primary care and healthcare in Canada in general? It's doctor shortage, it's staffing, it's recruiting. And so that's the problem we're solving. So certainly I don't want to like put my foot in my mouth and get squashed by a competitor next month, but I think it's unlikely. It really is like a time and growing and solving the current biggest issues in healthcare.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Vollrath. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm curious about kind of how you folks landed on a business model for Cherry Health, right? There's probably lots of different options for you, and how you landed in the current time on an advertising-based one. But do you ever see it, kind of expanding out, maybe as you expand the services you offer?
Absolutely. So yeah, we've got, again, that focus topic of not boiling the ocean. We've got a ton of things we want to do and a ton of things that will generate a lot of revenue in the long term. And going all the way back, like the initial business model that we pitched is like 0% what we've actually wound up settling on. So initially we had, I think it was a fee for clinics to get on there. It's just kind of like your typical ad model. People would pay money and then they would go on there. We quickly realized that was stunting the growth of the network. So just the market dynamics of being in a physician shortage, how likely are you to go and pay any volume of money when you're probably not going to get anything out of it, right? So you'll post an ad and then it'll sit there for a month, a year, or whatever. And this is like way back when we first started. And it wouldn't get any response. And I mean, this is the case in most platforms where doctor jobs are getting posted. There just aren't enough butts to fill seats. And so people make this like risk reward calculation of, do I want to light my money on fire? And there's a giant chance I get nothing out of it. And we quickly realized that fee model on there was hindering things. So then we decided to go to a on success based model. We're like, okay, we're going to like be more like a recruiting agency. We'll have a big lump sum fee. And then if we find you a doctor, it'll be a little more hands-on. Like we're like cruising the network, trying to do the matchmaking like a typical headhunter would. And then there's no risk to you. It's not going to cost anything. But then the doctors didn't like that. Everyone's tech savvy. They don't want to, millennials get anxiety thinking about answering the phone, right? So this whole generation of like new grads and people that are actually like taking jobs, they didn't want that like high touch, white glove kind of approach. So that fell short quickly. And then that's how we realized we're like, the only way this is going to grow is if it's free. Like if there's any kind of like barrier or financial roadblock there, like, and the financial piece is only a small part of it, right? So there's the time investment of like getting on the platform, creating your profile, creating your clinic profile, making a job that actually looks good. And so there's this like big initial kind of burden and lift. And then when you put on top of that a $9.99 fee, even just $10, that was the nail in the coffin. People are like, can't afford it. And like to get that hyper local network effect, like where there's just critical mass of jobs and doctors in an area, it just has to be there, lowest barriers as possible to adoption to actually get to that state where it's functional. And so that's how we settled on the advertising model. We do have two other revenue generating mechanisms right now. So the booster job, if you want it to go to the top of the pile, you can for a couple bucks a day. And then that's actually working quite well for the people boosting their jobs. And then the recruiter tools. So if you want to not just post and pray, but you want to actually like, who's locuming in Calgary, and then send messages out actively. It's kind of like fly fishing versus fishing with a bobber where you're just sitting there waiting is kind of how I liken it. So that's the current revenue model.
Thank you. That was fascinating. One other question I was interested in was, I think we're all aware that Canada, like the digital presence within the medical clinics across Canada, I guess most across the States as well, kind of monopolized, right, by a couple of key players, TELUS Health, etc. How has that either served as a tailwind or headwind for the work that you folks do?
So in Canada, I don't know if that's particularly accurate. So there are definitely some clinic chains, there are some big players, but by and large, like the vast majority of healthcare practitioners work for like small, independent, like one-off single facility kind of enterprise, right? There's just those community clinics. Here in Alberta, I mean, I can think of 2 different clinics that have more than 10 locations. There's a few with 3 or 4, but like the bulk of it is 1, maybe 2 kind of thing. So there's not that much of that. I almost wish there were more because it's easier to get to them that way, right? So like the amount of effort you put in advertising and acquiring a customer once for one location is the same amount that it takes to get a chain of 10. And so that one of the detriments in the medical space is that everything is so fragmented and scattered there.
I think that's fair. I totally agree. Yeah, there's not as much kind of consolidation. I was thinking more on the digital health side, kind of like the EMR vendors, or I don't actually know what the landscape looks like, but I've just heard, I guess, that the digital presence is owned by 1 or 2 companies. I'm not sure what that looks like though.
Maybe you'd call it an oligopoly, kind of. Like there definitely are like some bigger players in that space. Because we're so broad and vast across the whole country, we service all 13 provinces and territories. We've opted to not have any kind of like technical or deep integration, like actually plugging into the EMRs. We thought about this quite a bit, like Well Health, one of our biggest investors, they actually have their own suite, Oscar EMR. You've probably heard of that, Oscar Pro. And so that was like one of the big questions on the table, but just the amount of tech and resources that it takes to create a single implementation. And then that gets you, a small maybe 10% of all the clinics in one province. And then as soon as you move to the next province, now you're at a completely different set. So we haven't gone down that route. Our platform's entirely standalone, and there's just, you talk to any other companies, sometimes the integration is like a make or break for their product, but or a make for their product, like that winds up unlocking huge growth and potential. But just as many other ones, you really hear about like how much of a struggle it is to actually get one integration, let alone this cross-platform talk amongst others.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I just had one question. Hi, Dr. Vollrath. Great presentation. I wanted to ask if you had any advice to offer for like writing proposals for funding and like how do you convince them to give you grants? How do you convince them that your platform is important and it has like had an impact?
There's a lot to unpack there. So definitely like when they ask you about the initial packet, like the upfront summary of the project, make sure you knock it out of the park at that one. I've done some like grant review projects myself. And then sometimes that's actually like one of the key factors is that's like the first stage gate of do they even read the rest of the package. So definitely like make sure that upfront summary overview is absolutely stellar. And then it really is about like impact and traction. How will this funding have an impact, socially, in terms of patient care, in terms of whatever the theme that they're trying to knock off is, and then what proof do you have that that's the case? And then also like there's a lot that goes into it, like how are you going to collaborate with other partners, how are you going to leverage that funding to get more grant funding or to get further capital allocated to it, like how convincing can you be that it will be sustainable after the grant funding runs out? Is there if it's a not-profit or if it's a for-profit, like is there a path where it brings in money and becomes its own self-fueling fire? There's a lot of different things that go into play, but definitely like making sure that you like have a convincing argument for like, is this viable and will it work? And then will it stick around after the grant funding has run out?
Okay, cool. So for like the initial summary, you would think maybe like start with the problem and how you're addressing it, that type of thing? Or would you say like start with some like quantifying the impact that you've initially had?
So definitely like starting with how big is this problem? Like how giant of a thing is this in the first place? What will be the actual impact if it does get adopted en masse? And then if you have some sort of like pilot or proof or evidence that it's working somewhere locally and it's actually starting to add value, now you can start creating that story of, all the way from A, B, C, D to the end, how it's going to grow and add value and survive.
Okay, cool. And what are your thoughts on having like your inspiration story in a grant proposal? Like, is that something that you think is good to add or something that's just like not, you're not as interested in when you read the proposals?
So it kind of depends. When you're talking to investors, like for dilutive capital, and that they're wondering what is that personal connection? Why do you care about this problem? What does this actually matter to you? That's one of the biggest things that they bank off of for early stage companies. With grants, I can't say 100% that that personal connection is the linchpin there, but definitely like if you have a personal reason for being passionate about a project, put it in there. I don't know if it needs to like take up like a whole section or be the bulk of an answer, but like making sure that they know you have that personal connection, I think there's definitely value in that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Maybe one more question for you, Dr. Vollrath. I think as we all are going through, pre-clerkship, clerkship, getting some exposure to clinical, you probably have this mindset, but what is kind of the way that we can think about our clinical experiences in an entrepreneurial way? Are there any tips and guidance on things you'd look out for or questions you'd ask?
Solve problems that you yourself experience. That's where some of the best solutions come from. You as the boots on the ground, feeling the frustration, and being a younger new generation physician who's tech savvy, who can use a computer, can use a phone, like how would you solve your problem? And then start working backwards from that. Like how could we get a solution off the ground, starting from what it would need to look like? But just keep your eyes open the whole time. Like we all face different things every day that are just frustrating and causing headaches. There's no shortage of like need for innovation, especially in the Canadian healthcare space. So any potential friction point is a great opportunity for innovation.